Tarrant County is one of the fastest growing places in Texas. In fact, it is the third largest county in the Lone Star State. Now, what makes this particularly interesting from a public policy perspective is that it's also home to one of the most conservative governing bodies around. And I am, of course, referring to the Tarrant County Commissioners Court. Now, to help me understand what's happening in Tarrant County and why it's such a special place, I've invited Tarrant County Judge Tim O'Hare to talk to a little bit to us about taxes, spending, and governing in general. Judge, thanks for joining us today. What a pleasure it is to have you on.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me, and thank you for highlighting what's going on in Tarrant County.
I wish my own county would act a little bit more like y'all, but let's get right into it, Judge. So what's happening in Tarrant County, and why is it such a special place that seems to be attracting people from all over the nation?
Tarrant County, as you said, the third largest county in the state, has a population of almost 2.2 million people, which means it has more people than 15 U.S. states, which people kind of find that hard to believe. And it really is a place, a large urban county, that still celebrates faith, family, and freedom. And what we've been doing here in the last now couple of years, almost 2 years, we have been reducing our spending, watching every single dollar like fiscal hawks ought to. We've cut taxes, we've put in homestead exemptions, we've reduced our spending significantly, and people are noticing, people like you. And one of the things that when I ran for office, I talked about cutting spending, cutting taxes, doing all these things. And one of the things I relied on was a Texas Public Policy Foundation study from 2016 to 2020. If I have my numbers right, I don't have it in front of me, but spending by the Tarrant County government from 16 to 20 went up by more than 44%, while inflation and population growth only went up a little more than 12%. So after 2020, Tarrant County actually went on a spending spree that was running faster than the one y'all did the study on. So we have been spending money like mad. We went back and looked for 30 years. The Tarrant County Commissioners Court sets the property tax rate for both the county government and then the hospital district. We went back and looked 30 years. That's where we stopped. And it was for sure that 29 of the 30 years, the Tarrant County Commissioners Court had raised property taxes on people in Tarrant County on the hospital district. There was 1 year we couldn't quite say. It was the year of the subprime mortgage crisis. We couldn't say they did or they didn't. Possible there was a little bit of a tax cut in there, possible it wasn't. But 29 of 30 years. So we set out to change that. We've now passed 2 different budgets, set tax rates 2 years in a row, and we have provided what really can only be described as historic property tax relief for Tarrant County residents and businesses.
And I want to get into the tax issue in just a second, but I have to ask, what's been the reception of all of these various fiscal policy measures being implemented? Would you say constituents have generally been happy?
Well, they've been thrilled. And, even in 2023, I think Texas had the 6th highest property tax assessment on average of any state in the country. So I think everybody knows property tax relief is needed. Of course, the constitutional amendment that did the buy-down rate and put in the publicly elected appraisal district officials, that passed statewide. I think it was 92%. I don't know if I've ever seen a constitutional amendment pass that overwhelmingly. And so people want it. The response has been fantastic. And what is often asked is, what services did you cut? And the reality is we haven't. We've increased funding for law enforcement. We've increased funding for veteran services. We've increased funding for mental health related care and treatment. We've just done it by good, sound business fiscal management, but we've also made it a priority that we are going to reduce spending and we're going to cut taxes. I'll give you one example of something. I was sworn in January 1st, 2023. I don't know if it was the second meeting or the third, maybe it was the fourth. It was very early on in my term that the Commissioners Court approves out-of-state travel for elected officials and county employees. So we had a couple of requests. One was to go to a conference at Disney World in Florida and stay in one of their nicest resort hotels to the tune of about $600 a night. At the same time, there was a request to travel to San Diego and stay in a high-rise hotel on the beach, and that was 570 something a night, I think it was. And we put a stop to that right then and there, completely changed the policy, rejected those. And we're not going to make our employees or elected officials stay in, the Motel 6, no offense to Motel 6, but we're also not going to stay in the finest resorts in the largest cities in the country. That was one of what has been probably 100 things we have done to reduce spending and actually pay attention to the dollar. That's what people deserve, and that's what we're doing.
Wow, that's fantastic. On the tax piece, I know you guys have done a lot of really good things as it relates to the tax rate specifically and also the homestead exemption. I was just wondering, can you walk us through what it means to adopt the no new revenue tax rate and what it is exactly that y'all did on the local option homestead exemption?
Sure. So let's do tax rate first. The state has a formula that the legislature created several years ago that each taxing entity is responsible for filling out, completing, and making sure that you post in public places what your no new revenue tax rate would be. And theoretically, the no new revenue tax rate is no one would pay more taxes to the taxing entity than they did the year before. Now, it doesn't work perfectly because appraisals change. You have a business, they may see their appraisal go up 50%. A homeowner can, if it's a homestead, can only go up 10%. But it fluctuates. But in theory, it's the tax rate at which, if you pass it, nobody pays more than they did the year before. So what we did, the Commissioner's Court in Tarrant County sets the tax rate for both the county property taxes and the hospital district property taxes. And what we did last year was we cut both tax rates for the first time in the history of Tarrant County to below no new revenue. And they weren't below no new revenue by, 1/8 of a tenth of a penny. I mean, it was actually real property tax relief. And if you looked, and the homestead exemption I'll talk about in a second, but if you look at the property tax bills that came out last year, state law now requires on those bills, it requires each taxing entity to have it reflected how much they went up by percentage or how much they went down. And the property taxes that we set went down by somewhere between, for homeowners, 14 to 28%. Again, that's dependent upon how your property was appraised. And that's a whole different story in Tarrant County, where we've had a train wreck of an appraisal district for many years. Fortunately, some of that stuff's getting fixed. But that's what we did on the tax rates. We put them below no new revenue for both the county and the hospital district for the first time ever. We did the same thing again this year. So that's now 2 budgets in a row where we've gone below no new revenue on both tax rates. But the homestead exemption, this is interesting. State law allows a county to offer up to a 20% homestead exemption. And of the 6 largest counties in the state of Texas, 5 of them offer the full 20% when I took office. As you probably can guess or have already read, Tarrant County offered 0. And we put in a 10% homestead exemption again for both the county and JPS last year, finished it off this year, put the remaining 10% in. So we're talking about collectively with these tax rates and the homestead exemption, we have saved well over $100 million in property taxes for people. And I give you one example of another thing we did. So when a county is setting its budget, it creates a budget, and then there's a tax rate that supports that budget. There were approximately 245 positions in the IT department that repeatedly for a couple of years in a row would not get filled. So they might fill 10 of them and lose 12, and then fill 8 of them and lose 4, and it just kind of fluctuated. But it was consistently around 240, 245 positions in the IT department that would never get filled or weren't consistently filled. We just eliminated those positions in last year's budget. That saved approximately $30 million for taxpayers, that one move alone. And I have yet to hear one elected official, department head, or anyone in the county tell us that their IT needs are not being met after that, removing those things. Nobody was laid off, just eliminated unfilled positions. We got a new IT director. came in probably in the last, it's probably been 8 months. And he has told me that's fine that we don't have those. We can actually do more cuts, and he's working to do that over time. So I love it when you can do it in a way where you don't have to lay off anyone, where it's just eliminating unfilled positions. And we're going to continue to do that as long as I'm here, where we can do it and still provide good services and run a strong, effective, efficient government where we maintain law and order, which is really priority number one, ought to be for most governments.
Yeah, no, I think that's very impressive. One of the things that I've observed amongst the local government landscape in general is there's a lot of spending pressures right now resulting from the expiration of pandemic aid. So, of course, as the federal government flooded the local government arena with all of the pandemic money. And unfortunately, what a lot of jurisdictions have done is they've used those funds to either plug budget holes that existed prior, or they've used these one-time monies in such a way that it's going to engender recurring costs. And so, lots of places right now are struggling with, how do we make things work, because all of that federal money is going away. And of course, the great temptation there is that they're going to raise taxes to continue those programs and services. Just wondering, I know you guys have done a lot to control costs and really right-size the budget. Do you see any of that pressure resulting from pandemic aid?
So Tarrant County received in two different batches, a $200 million batch and a $400 million batch, $600 million in basically what was COVID aid.
Mm-hmm.
And as you probably know, what happened with the federal government, they sent this to counties and cities all over the country. And then really quickly, everyone realized, well, you couldn't spend all this money to try to mitigate COVID if you wanted to. And it was just, then they started loosening the regulations on it. Okay, you don't really have to do it for COVID if it's for this or if it's for that. And then they just kept loosening and loosening and loosening, where it virtually became use it for whatever you want as long as you didn't already budget for it. That is just, it was grossly irresponsible by the federal government. It is one of the things that has led to this horrible inflation that everyone's been dealing with. In terms of pressure, I'll give you one other example of what we did that was related, that we used some of the COVID money for. So Tarrant County is I-35 runs right through the middle of Tarrant County, runs right through basically downtown Fort Worth. And so it comes up from the border, our southern border, and it's a big drug trafficking center just because we are on that I-35 corridor, and so much of our drugs that get into this country come through the southern border. So we have a fairly new DA. He took off the same time I did. His name's Phil Sorrells, and he's doing an outstanding job. Because we had so much fentanyl coming in and so many people dying and overdosing from fentanyl, he created it's not really a fentanyl trafficking task force, but that's what it really was created for. But it's a drug trafficking task force, and we at first used COVID money to do that. Mm-hmm. We have now absorbed that into the budget. It's not COVID money longer, but we've been able to continue to fund it. Mm-hmm. So the COVID money did give us some things that we were able to do. Was it worth the cost to the rest of the country? I mean, that's something probably scholars will debate for a long time, but I mean, it was grossly irresponsible spending that you could never spend on what they actually set out to say you were supposed to spend it on. It's interesting about our budget. When I took office, we had about a $904 or $5 million operating budget for the county. And the first year, we passed a budget that was $896 million. So we dropped it down. I think the total number we dropped it was $8.1 million. There are 41 cities in Tarrant County, 20 school districts. We haven't been able to find, and I've made this statement so many times in so many places, if it actually happened, I'm sure somebody would have said something at this point, but I could still be proven wrong. But we didn't find a single taxing entity in all of Tarrant County that actually reduced their budget from the 23 budget to the 24 budget, not a single one. So we reduced it $8.1 million. This year, we reduced our operating budget $50 million. So in 2 years, we have reduced our operating budget almost $60 million. And it's when you run government like a business, it doesn't mean it lacks compassion. It doesn't mean you just treat people like cattle, but when you actually watch every dollar, pay attention to everything, not just say yes every time somebody inside the government says, I need a new position, need a new position, need a position. If you watch things like a hawk, you find out there's a lot of things that aren't needed, but it doesn't take real long to get your staff to understand, okay, it's a different era. We're doing things differently. We're not going to just throw money around. We've got people in charge that now recognize this is other people's money. It's not the government's money. And it's our responsibility to make sure we spend it wisely, which, quite frankly, for several years, I don't think that's what was going on in Tarrant County.
No, that's amazing, Judge. Let me ask you, because I field a lot of calls from county officials all the time, asking how they can do things better. And oftentimes I direct them your direction. I say, well, look at what Tarrant County's doing and try to do that. But I want to hear from you specifically. What would you advise county officials who are looking to move their county in a more conservative direction? What are some of the things they ought to be doing?
Well, I think there's two things that I start with when it comes to any government entity, um, education excluded, and that is there's two primary or the two most important roles of government, I should say. Or one is to protect your God-given rights, and the second is to keep you safe. So you really are making sure people are free to make their own decisions, trying to eliminate regulations, trying to eliminate hurdles. We have a couple of cities in Tarrant County that dealing with them from a development standpoint, from a building standpoint, I mean, it is a nightmare. They are bureaucratic disasters. Then we have others that are very easy to deal with. And that's why you see things there moving and shaking all the time and new companies coming in, new jobs coming in. So, one, don't overregulate them. Two, make it easy to do business with sensible regulations that are pro business and pro job, which are one and the same. And the more jobs you have, and the more higher paying jobs you have, the better it is for everybody. A rising tide lifts all boats. So, but start with public safety. Make sure you do it. We do not want to in Tarrant County. We're not going to as long as I'm here, as long as Sheriff Bill Wayburn is here, as long as DA Phil Soares is here. We're not going to look like one of these large urban counties around the country where you see sometimes riots in the streets and vandalism in buildings. We are going to protect people here, and we're going to maintain law and order first and foremost, period, the end. But the other thing is it's got to be intentional. It's got to be what you focus on literally every commissioner's court meeting. Every meeting outside a commissioner's court meeting, as you well know, a lot of the things are already kind of done when you get to the commissioner's court meeting or the city council meeting. But you got to be intentional about it literally from day one and every single thing that you look at. So we have something called the PEBC, and it's the Public Employee Benefits Conglomerate. I'm not sure what the last thing is, but it's basically a thing where we go get health insurance for our employees, and we partner with Dallas, Parker County, Denton County, the North Texas Tollway Authority, and we went in and we were able to provide health insurance for our employees that basically provided 99.5% of everything they had before, doctors, hospitals, everything, you name it. But we saved $15 million over 5 years. And it was because we were looking at costs, looking at ways to save money, make that a priority. I promise you there's no government entity anywhere in the state of Texas or probably in the United States for that matter that you can't find things to cut that are unnecessary, that are poorly spent. I mean, there is opportunity if you look for it and you make it a priority. And here's the thing that I would tell them, because you asked, what would I tell them? There are very few people, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, that are going to complain when you do it. Now, obviously, I'm a Republican, but I can tell you we get appreciation from Democrats regularly for thank you for watching our dollars. Thank you for what you're doing. And I think you can see just by the constitutional amendment in November of 23 on the tax relief 92% passage, that is a bipartisan thing. And much of our tax relief, we have 3 Republicans on the court, 2 Democrats. much of our tax relief that we've done last 2 years was bipartisan.
Mm-hmm. I think that's
They
spot
were
on.
supported. Some of it was supported by both Democrats. Some of it was supported by only one. A couple things only supported by the Republicans. But everyone appreciates it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's spot on, Judge. You've been generous with your time, and I'm going to let you go here in just a second, but I've got one last burning question. When it comes to the average person, what would you recommend that people do to realize better county government? Should they be showing up, talking to the local officials? What exactly, how do they get better government?
That is a great question. So I don't say what I'm about to say because I'm in county government. I believe it, having been in it, having been in city government. I think county government has the biggest impact on people's day-to-day lives over any other level of government. State, federal, there are 69 elected officials inside the Tarrant County government. And you think about what is county government? It's elections, it's the district attorney's office prosecuting the accused. It's the criminal courts. It's the civil courts. It's the probate courts. It's hospital district. It's veteran services. There's so many. I could go on and on. I can name 50 other things that's in county government. So it's very important, and people need to pay more attention to county government. It's sometimes not quite as sexy as what goes on at the federal government. It certainly doesn't get the same press coverage. But when you try to elect people who understand business, who bring business-minded principles to government, that's what's best for everybody. Instead of bringing people into government who live in a fantasy world, who are trying to create a impossible to ever realize utopia. It may sound good, it may sound great when they're saying it, but there's so many things they say that literally can never work and can never be done. Stay away from those people. Focus on the people that actually have run businesses, who understand how hard it is to make a dollar, how hard it is to keep a dollar, how hard it is to save a dollar, and that will bring business principles to it. That's what they need to be doing. And getting involved in elections, getting out and voting. I've heard, it's amazing, and just this one, churches, for example. I've heard this stat for years now that 50% of people that are in church are not registered to vote, and 50% of the people that are registered don't vote. And so that's kind of stunning. I'm not sure those numbers are accurate anymore. I'm not sure they're accurate for Tarrant County, but this stuff matters. Every single election matters. And you see these local elections, school board, city council, where in some counties, it's like 4 to 8% turnout. Well, you kind of get the government that you asked for. And people need to be involved in every single election, every time. I know we have in Texas what seems like an election every 15 minutes. And, we get a text message, probably since we've been on the phone, I've received 82 text messages saying they need money for this or that. Yeah, it can be annoying, but at the end of the day, this stuff is important. And we need to be voting in every single election and knowing who we're voting for and voting for people that are going to be fiscally responsible with your money.
Well, I couldn't agree more. You get the government that you deserve. And when you don't participate, don't expect good results. Judge, we'll have to leave it there. I want to thank you for your time. This has been absolutely fantastic. And I hope you come back and join us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. And I'm happy to come on anytime.
Thank you, sir.